Before you is one of the most chilling scenes ever captured on camera. Real footage of a serial killer on the hunt. The murder kit awaited its moment to claim yet another life, but fate intervened as its owner was already under police surveillance. A bloody trail followed him from a sunny resort in the UK to a picturesque town in southern Italy. The criminal genius left clear clues near his victims, mocking the detectives and leading them astray. A strange fetish drove the man to commit unimaginably cruel acts, but ultimately, it led to his devastating downfall. On September 12, 1993, the Claps family was preparing for a pleasant Sunday getaway at a small cottage in Tito, far from their bustling hometown of Potenza, Italy. Alongside their parents, Antonio and Filomena, was their 20-year-old son, Luciano. All three were awaiting the arrival of their eldest son, 24-year-old Gildo Claps, and their younger daughter, 16-year-old Elisa Claps. They were supposed to arrive afternoon with Elisa's friend, Eliana de Silis. Elisa and Eliana had agreed to attend a service at the church in the town center. Afterward, the girls planned to return home to Elisa's and then join the rest of the family for lunch at the cottage. When an hour passed and the girls didn't return, Gildo began to worry. His sister was always punctual and would call home if she was running late. Someone rang the doorbell. It was Eliana. She and Elisa had separated at the church, and Eliana assumed her friend had already returned home. Eliana was surprised that Elisa was still missing. Concerned, Gildo walked through the town center, searching for his sister. There were many people near the church, but Elisa was nowhere among them. When Gildo and Elisa didn't arrive by 2 p.m., the rest of the family returned to Potenza to find out what was happening, and were shocked to hear that the girl had gone missing. Gildo asked Eliana to recount his sister's exact movements that morning. That's when Eliana confessed that she hadn't been completely honest. They didn't attend the service. It was a pretext for Elisa to meet with her acquaintance, 21-year-old dental technician student Danilo Restivo. Although he came from a respected family, with his father being the director of the local branch of the National Library, the young man was not popular and often became the target of ridicule, especially from girls. Elisa, being a kind and compassionate person, felt sorry for him. However, she made it clear to him that there could be nothing between them. But on that day, she agreed to meet him because he insisted on giving her a gift to congratulate her on passing her exams. Elisa and Danilo arranged to meet at the church at 11:30 a.m., when the service was ending. Eliana was waiting outside, where she accidentally ran into another friend, Angelica. The girls didn't see Elisa leave the church but assumed they might have missed her in the crowd. As Danilo was the last person to see his sister, Gildo called his home, demanding an explanation. Danilo explained that their meeting lasted 15 minutes, during which they sat at the altar and chatted. After that, Elisa left the church, while Restivo stayed behind to pray, and that was the last time he saw her. When Elisa didn't return home after several hours, her brother Luciano went to see Restivo personally. Danilo was visibly nervous, and evasive in his answers. Luciano noticed a large bandage on his left hand and asked what happened. Restivo explained that he tripped at a construction site and cut his hand. He reiterated that he didn't know where the girl was. Elisa's family reported her disappearance to the police and requested that Restivo be questioned, but their plea was dismissed, and they were advised to go home and wait for the girl to reappear on her own. Not knowing what else to do, Gildo returned to the church but found the door locked. He arranged to be let inside and searched the premises once again. Behind the altar, he noticed another locked door that led to the top floor of the church. Gildo asked for that door to be opened as well, but he was informed that the only person with a key was the priest, Father Domenico Sabbia, who had left for a few days at a spa resort. 2 days later, when there was still no news from the girl, the police finally spoke to Danilo, who claimed that Elisa was unhappy at home and wanted to run away to Naples, but he tried to dissuade her from this idea. He stuck to his version that she left the church after their brief conversation, while he stayed behind. He didn't mention the gift for Elisa but said he asked her advice regarding another girl, Paula, whom he wanted to date. After the conversation, he went home through a construction site where he had been with Paula a few days ago, fell from an unfinished escalator, and cut his hand. Detectives doubted the truthfulness of Danilo's words. Firstly, he was surprisingly precise in his statements. Secondly, there was no evidence that Elisa wanted to run away from her loving family. Finally, it was unclear how he only cut his hand and didn't break his glasses after falling headfirst from the under-construction escalator. The police visited the Restivo family's home, requesting to see the clothes their son wore on that day. However, Danilo's father refused to cooperate without a warrant. The police left empty-handed, convinced that Restivo was hiding something, and checked his name in the database. It turned out that he had already had troubles with the law at the age of 14 when he attacked other boys he was playing with. And that wasn't all. Several months ago, 3 female students living near his house accused him of stalking. He clearly enjoyed instilling fear in girls by calling them at home and describing what they were wearing or playing them terrifying music from the horror movie Profondo Rosso. Investigators were also informed that Danilo had an extremely strange habit. He liked to cut strands of hair from strangers in public transport. The police had heard about these incidents but unfortunately couldn't prove that Restivo was behind them. Meanwhile, news of Elisa Clapp's disappearance quickly spread throughout the country, and the family received constant calls from pranksters claiming that they had the girl and she was fine. The police dismissed most of these calls, although a few messages claiming to have seen the girl in a white Fiat Uno caught their attention. The thing is, one of Elisa's friends, Angelica, revealed that another admirer of hers, a 20-year-old named Eris Gega, was walking around the city center on that day. Eris had recently arrived from Albania with his family. When Eris was invited for questioning, he denied being at the church and provided the police with the names of friends who could confirm his alibi. However, not only did his friends fail to corroborate his story, but they also stated that he was indeed in the city center on the day of the girl's disappearance. Moreover, he drove a white Fiat Uno, the same type of car that several witnesses claimed to have seen Elisa in on the day of her disappearance, and one witness identified Eris as the driver of that car. Suspicions of Eris's involvement grew when the police found Elisa's diary, which was missing several pages. Forensic experts were able to reconstruct fragments of those pages and discovered that some words were written in the Albanian language. Eris was questioned several more times, and each time his story changed. At one point, he claimed that Danilo Restivo instructed him to deny knowing each other. Eventually, Eris was charged with giving false testimony. In December, an anonymous call was made to the police. The female caller claimed to have seen Elisa in Rome. She said that Elisa had been beaten and forced into a white Fiat Uno. Towards the end of the call, the voice said,
"Please, help her. And help me."
The recorded call was analyzed, and the results were astonishing. The caller turned out to be Eliana. Her words had long raised suspicions among investigators because she frequently changed her version of events. Like Eris, she was charged with giving false testimony. While the police could not completely rule out the possibility that Elisa had run away from home, detectives gradually came to the conclusion that the girl was no longer alive, and Danilo was responsible for her disappearance. He may have coerced other acquaintances of hers to lie to the police, but without a body, they had nothing to charge him or any other suspect with, except for the false testimony charges. On the other hand, the Clapp's family was convinced that influential people, including friends of Danilo's father and the priest of the church where she went missing, were protecting the reputation of their daughter's killer. Father Domenico Seppia, in particular, did not allow anyone to enter the church's attic and refused to allow a box to be placed in the building where anyone could anonymously leave a note with information about Elisa, even though all other churches readily agreed to it. He even attempted to deny knowing Danilo at all, But this was quickly disproven when a photograph surfaced showing them together on Danilo's 18th birthday. Based on all the gathered facts, Danilo Restivo was ultimately arrested for giving false testimony. He was found guilty and sentenced to 20 months in prison. After the trial, Gildo was amazed by the judicial system, wondering how someone could be found guilty of giving false testimony, and yet not be compelled to tell the whole truth. Nevertheless, Danilo served half of his sentence, and was released. The police had nothing more to charge him with. Eliana and Eris were not found guilty of perjury by the judge because they supposedly provided false testimony not to confuse the investigation but out of fear for their own lives. On the second anniversary of Eliza's disappearance in Potenza, all kinds of rumors circulated, such as her being in the hands of the Sicilian mafia, having a secret relationship with a priest, or being sold by human traffickers. The family was constantly harassed by people demanding money for information about the girl. Despite the difficulties, Eliza's relatives actively encouraged public interest in the case. When the internet began to gain popularity, they created a website to provide updates on the investigation. On April 23, 1999, an email allegedly written by Eliza arrived on the website. She claimed to have left Potenza, and was living in Brazil. The girl asked for forgiveness for causing pain to her family but explained that she was unhappy and had to leave forever. She added that this would be her first and last letter to the family. Filomena desperately wanted to believe that her daughter was alive and happy. However, her sons were not convinced, knowing that their sister had left home without money or a passport. They hired a private detective to trace the IP address of the email, only to discover that it was sent not from Brazil but from an internet cafe in Potenza. The cafe staff provided a list of all visitors on that day, and it turned out that Danilo Restivo was in the cafe at the time the email was sent. Eliza's family immediately informed the police and demanded that Danilo be questioned, believing that he had devised this plan to convince them to give up the search for the girl. However, they were told that the active phase of the investigation had been concluded, and there was nothing more they could do. Bournemouth, a resort town located on the southern coast of Britain, is 2,000 kilometers north of Potenza. Tuesday morning, November 12, 2002, started like any other for the Barnett family in Bournemouth. 48-year-old Heather Barnett dropped off her children, 11-year-old Caitlin and 14-year-old Terry, at school and returned home after 8:30 a.m. Heather, as usual, wanted to have her morning cup of tea and get to work. She worked from home, making custom curtains, pillowcases, and similar items. She always had many orders, and that day was no exception. A few hours later, Terry and Caitlin returned home from school. The unlocked front door made the kids slightly uneasy. For their mom, who was definitely at home because her car was parked in the driveway, and the radio was playing. Their mom didn't respond. After searching all the rooms except the bathroom, Caitlin called for her brother. For some reason, she didn't want to go in there. After knocking and receiving no response, the children pushed the door, and it slowly swung open, revealing a horrific scene. Their mother was lying on the floor, clearly a victim of a very brutal crime. Terry called emergency services and led his screaming sister outside to wait for the ambulance and police to arrive. The neighbor across the street happened to be parking their car when they noticed the two hysterical children. They brought the children into their home, reassuring them that they would be safe there. The arriving police discovered that nothing was stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry. The crime itself occurred shortly after the woman dropped off her children at school. Luminal testing revealed shoe prints, size 9, leading from the bathroom to the woman's workshop, and then abruptly disappearing in the middle of the room. It became clear that the killer had changed from dirty footwear to clean ones, which they had brought with them, before leaving the house. Fibers on the woman's body indicated that the perpetrator was wearing gloves. All the evidence pointed to a carefully planned crime. The killer came prepared with a change of footwear and clothing, a hammer, a knife, and gloves. However, they left behind one piece of evidence. There was a green hand towel with Heather's blood on it lying on the workshop chair. The towel did not belong to the family, and considering where it was found, only the killer could have placed it there. They used it to wipe the blood from their face and hands before changing clothes. But the most intriguing evidence was the locks of hair found in the woman's hands. Initially, the police assumed that she had managed to pull out a strand of the perpetrator's hair, but forensic analysis revealed something unexpected. The hair had been neatly cut with a sharp instrument, and while the hair in one hand belonged to Heather, the hair in the other hand belonged to another woman. The detective spoke with Caitlin Berry and learned that a week before the murder, their spare house keys had gone missing. Heather had changed the locks but suspected their neighbor, who had recently visited to order curtains for his girlfriend. It was the same neighbor who comforted the children, an Italian man they knew as Danny. Danilo Restivo, known as Danny to the neighbors, moved to Britain in May 2002 and settled with an Italian woman named Fiona Mozengo, whom he met online. Their house was directly opposite Heather Barnett's house. The police spoke with Danilo immediately upon arriving at the crime scene, and he promptly informed them that he had an alibi for the entire morning. He claimed to have taken a bus to a computer center, where he attended classes. The police checked his bus ticket and the registration log at the center, and his statements were fully corroborated. However, when an officer visited Danilo's house 5 days later to collect DNA samples and asked to see the footwear he wore on the day of the crime, he reluctantly led the detective to the bathroom, where his sneakers were soaking in a bucket of bleach. He explained that he was cleaning them. This raised suspicion for the detective, who confiscated the shoes. However, the sneakers did not match the footprints found in Heather's house. Despite the lack of direct evidence, the police had a reason to be suspicious of Danilo Restivo due to his suspicious behavior regarding cleaning his sneakers. They decided to run his name through a database and made a shocking discovery. This was not the first time that Restivo's name had been linked to a criminal investigation. Over 10 years ago, he may have been involved in the disappearance of a young Italian girl named Elisa Claps. Investigators re-examined his alibi for that case as well and found it to be less reliable than it initially seemed. The time of his registration in the computer center's logbook had been altered from 10:28 to 9:28, and it was done rather clumsily. Although he had a bus ticket with the specified travel time, nothing would have prevented him from getting off at the next stop and returning to Heather's house. Moreover, surveillance cameras captured a man resembling him crossing the road near Heather's house at 9:24. Unfortunately, the video quality was poor and did not allow for a precise identification of the man. Nevertheless, for the second time in his life, Danilo became the prime suspect in a case, but once again, all the evidence against him was circumstantial. The detectives contacted the police in Potenza, where they were informed about Danilo's rare fetish of cutting locks of hair from unknown girls. This information only strengthened the investigators' belief in his involvement in the crime. In April 2004, the police began surveillance on Danilo Restivo, and quickly learned about another suspicious habit of the suspect. Restivo liked to visit a remote park in Throop near Bournemouth, where he would hide behind bushes and observe girls who were jogging or walking their dogs. On May 12, despite the almost summery weather, he was in the park wearing 2 sets of clothing, including waterproof pants, gloves, sunglasses, and a hooded sweatshirt that covered his face. His behavior was so suspicious that the police were afraid they wouldn't be able to prevent another murder. To avoid revealing the surveillance, several officers in uniform approached the suspect, pretending to investigate car thefts in the park, and asked to inspect his belongings. The police found what they called Restivo's murder kit, including a ski mask, scissors, gloves, wet wipes, garbage bags, and a large knife. Restivo remained calm and claimed he had found the knife in the grass and took it to prevent children from getting hurt. When asked what he was doing in the park, he said he was collecting insects for his pet lizard. Even the police had to admit that it was a plausible explanation for why he was hiding in the park bushes, and once again, the detectives had nothing concrete to confront Danilo with. It was decided to change tactics and seek assistance from the public. The investigators wanted to find the owner of the hair strands found in Heather's hand. They reached out to the media in both Britain and Italy and received numerous calls from girls who reported having their hair cut in public transportation incidents, particularly in Britain since 2002 when Restivo moved to Bournemouth. All the girls provided DNA samples, but none matched the strand of hair found at the crime scene. For some time, the investigation reached a dead end until 2007 when the strand of hair was reanalyzed using a new technology that could determine where the owner of the hair had lived. It was revealed that the hair belonged to a girl who lived in the UK, but she had visited Valencia, Spain, 2 months before her hair was forcibly cut, and a few weeks later, she had been to Tampa, Florida. The police, inspired by such detailed information, reached out to the public again, but without success. It's possible that the girl simply wasn't following the news, but the police fear that she may have become a victim of the killer's previous crime. Despite this initial setback, science eventually played a role in the case. In 2009, forensic experts re-examined the green towel from Heather's house as technology had significantly advanced, and they hoped to uncover something new. This time, the experts were able to separate Heather's blood from the sweat and skin particles of another person. Although it couldn't be claimed with 100% certainty that it was Danilo Restivo's DNA, an expert stated that there was only a 1 in 57,000 chance that it belonged to someone else. In the same year, Restivo's sneakers were examined using more modern techniques, and traces of blood were found on the insoles. This indicated that there was blood on Restivo's socks when he put on the shoes. It corroborated the detective's theory that the perpetrator had brought a change of shoes. Unfortunately, the bleach used made DNA analysis entirely impossible, once again preventing a direct link between Danilo and Heather's death. Restivo knew what evidence he could potentially leave behind, so he took precautions by changing his clothes, wearing gloves, and using bleach to remove blood stains. He was aware of the things that could connect him to the crime scene and did everything to hinder that. He was prepared, had a plan, and acted accordingly. Fortunately, the police will be able to accuse Restivo of Heather's murder, but not before a horrifying discovery is made in Italy. On March 17, 2010, something unexpected happened. In Potenza, workers were repairing the local church where Elisa had disappeared years ago. The priest had passed away 2 years prior, and the attic door was no longer secured. 2 workers went upstairs, with one of them searching for roof damage, illuminating his way with a flashlight. It was then that he noticed something lying in the corner of the room, hidden behind construction debris. To his horror, he realized he was looking at a mummified body. The girl was identified by her shoes, glasses, and watch, which were found on her body. Elisa Claps was discovered in the very same church where she had disappeared 17 years ago. As later determined by the forensic examiner, she had died on the day of her disappearance, and her body had been dragged away and hidden. Signs of violence were found on her body. However, the most incriminating pieces of evidence were different strands of hair found in her hands and several more near the body. A sample of foreign DNA found on the girl's body was sent for analysis to Professor Vincenzo Pascali in Rome. However, he had a connection to the church where the crime took place and conducted the investigation rather carelessly, to say the least. He stated that the DNA did not match Danilo Restivo. But when the investigator decided to double-check this conclusion and sent the DNA sample to another laboratory, it matched with Restivo's DNA. The professor was suspended from work for 18 months, and Restivo was finally arrested on May 19, 2010. On June 30, 2011, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered a verdict, finding Danilo guilty of Heather's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. However, on November 21, 2012, he won an appeal, and the court changed the punishment for Heather's murder, sentencing him to a minimum of 40 years in prison. On November 11, 2011, in absentia, Restivo was sentenced to 30 years in prison for the murder of Elisa Claps. Given Danilo Restivo's evident inclination towards murder, investigators consider it important to explore his connection to other unsolved crimes in both Britain and Italy. His potential involvement in the death of a 27-year-old student from North Korea, who was studying English in Bournemouth, is considered the most likely. On July 12, 2002, 2 months before Heather's murder, the girl known as Jong-ok Shin or Oki was walking home after an evening spent with friends. She was literally 3 blocks away from Restivo's house when an unknown assailant inflicted a fatal injury on her. Oki managed to fend him off by screaming and even informed medical personnel that the attacker was wearing a ski mask. Another man was convicted for this crime after 3 attempts, but his conviction was based solely on the testimony of a female informant who had previously given false statements and often found herself in a state of intoxication. Her account was full of contradictions, and she didn't even mention the ski mask on the killer. Supporting the theory of Restivo's involvement is the physical resemblance between the 2 girls. Additionally, the fact that the crime occurred on the 12th of the month, just like the murders of Elisa and Heather, and even Restivo's visit to the park where his murder kit was found, suggests the significance of this date to him. The wound on Oki's body matches the length of the knife discovered with Danilo in the park. Moreover, various strands of hair were found on the sidewalk near Oki, although there was a hair salon nearby, making it difficult to determine their origin definitively. Legally speaking, Oki's case is considered closed, and Danilo Restivo has officially been charged with 2 murders. However, investigators are confident that there may be more victims. While Elisa's body was carefully hidden, Heather was heartlessly put on display for her own children to find. According to experts, this indicates an evolution in the criminal, demonstrating that he was unable to stop on his own.